In the last couple of months, I've been seeing a lot more people online theorizing about Xenoblade X. And I have to say, the average Xenoblade fan seems to know almost nothing about this game. Even the people who have played it. And most likely you as well. For example, did you know that Elma heavily implies that she's the reason Earth got destroyed? Or that Colorian DNA is almost identical to human DNA? Chances are you didn't. And those are only a couple of the obscure facts I will speak of in the theories I've come up with for this video. Even if you're a big Xenoblade X fan, I guarantee there will still be a few things you haven't heard before in these theories. So instead of wasting your time on a long intro, I'm just going to let my theories speak for themselves. And hopefully by the end of the video, I will have convinced you on them. So let's start. My first theory has to do with Elma, the character we learn almost nothing about despite her importance in the story. We know that she's some type of alien, who came to Earth to warn humans of an approaching intergalactic war, and help them escape the planet using her advanced technology. But other than that, the game doesn't tell us anything else. The art book mentions a few more things. And for this theory, I'm going to be focusing on these two pages, mentioning a Soma crown and a Cherub. Soma crown refers to the crystal structure on Elma's forehead, which, according to one of its concept designs, allows Elma to communicate with Cherub. As for Cherub, we know nothing about it other than its name. But apparently Cherub refers to a type of angel, which has 4 wings, but is sometimes depicted with 6. And it's known for protecting the entrance to the Garden of Eden. Sounds kinda familiar. But let's continue for now. What could be the Garden of Eden in the world of Xenoblade X? I think the Rose Garden is the closest thing we have. Thankfully, our knowledge of it isn't as limited as Cherub. It seems to be some type of alien facility, made from a stone-like metal, and it glows with a blue light. It's stated to be slightly different from the one with the ganglion, likely referring to the giant Samaar Mothership. The art book calls it an artificial celestial body in orbit above a planet. If you played Xenoblade 2, this should all be starting to sound very familiar. So let's connect some dots. There's a character made from a special type of living crystal. She can use her crown to communicate with a 4-winged divine entity that is tasked with protecting an orbital space facility, which is capable of triggering a phase shift explosion. It's actually kind of obvious when you lay things out a bit. And before anyone asks, I'm not trying to claim that these two events are the same. They're obviously different, but one of them was clearly inspired by the other. This won't be a video where I try to claim that Xenoblade X is connected to the mainline trilogy. I think it most likely will, but this video just isn't about that. Now, since I'm implying that the Rose Garden destroyed the Earth, and Elma has some degree of control over the Rose Garden, does that mean Elma is responsible for the destruction of Earth? The answer to that is yes, but also not exactly. For now, let's just say she's partially responsible, and Elma herself actually seems to acknowledge this. So, on that note, I'll move on to my next theory. So what did I mean by that? Why would Elma destroy the Earth? Before I start to explain, I want you to listen to something she says in a Chapter 1 cutscene.
It started at the end, 2 years ago. The end of Earth. The casualty of a battle between 2 hyper-advanced alien civilizations. Their technology and weapons were beyond our comprehension. We were like infants, naked, powerless. The Earth was reduced to ash and blown away.
I still wonder if I hadn't been there, if maybe all of this could have somehow been avoided.
No one can know that, Elma. What we do know is without you, there'd have been no Project Exodus, and no escape for any of us. Did it go perfectly? No. But we are here, and we are alive. We survived. So yes, Project Exodus.
Now think about why Alma would say this. How could things go any differently if she hadn't been there? If an alien battle was going to reach Earth, no matter what, and all that Alma did was come to help humans, how could her absence help with anything? It doesn't make any sense. Unless her being on Earth was directly correlated with the war arriving there. Before I start my theory, let's get the facts out of the way. There's only one thing we know for sure. Elma knew the war would happen 30 years in advance. And another thing is not told but hinted at. The Ganglion found Earth after coming across a Pioneer's plaque. But how could Elma know about the war 30 years in advance when one of the factions involved in the war seemingly only found Earth by coincidence? Because it wasn't a coincidence. You probably don't need me to explain to you how unlikely it is for a tiny Pioneer's plaque in the endless vastness of space to somehow find its way to the Ganglion flagship. And the chances of the ghosts arriving at the exact same time as the Ganglion, despite the coincidental nature of the Ganglion's arrival, is even more minuscule. So how could any of this happen? Well, here's my theory. Elma did not come to Earth. She was already there, inside the Rose Garden, or hiding among humans. She didn't predict a war 30 years in advance. She was given 30 years to get the humans off the planet. And the aliens didn't find Earth on their own. They were lured. Their battle over Earth was not planned. At least not by them. Goetia even says something that could be interpreted this way.
It's one thing to engage the enemy all the way out near that forsaken chunk of rock they call Earth. But then to be swallowed up by that strange light and dumped off here in this primordial hellhole? Are we cursed? And trapped with humans of all things.
I know this isn't conclusive evidence, but it clearly implies some sort of commonality between the war and the white light. It could just mean that they were both unpleasant. But it could just as easily imply that they were both unexpected, which the white light obviously was. So here's what I think actually happened. The battle over Earth was part of a greater scheme, devised by a third faction. They wanted to use the Rose Garden to generate a phase shift explosion and take out the Ghost and Samaar motherships at once. Elma was obviously a part of this plan, although we don't know if she agreed to it or was forced to comply. But if someone directed the alien factions towards Earth, it's not like she could do much to stop them. So the question that remains is, who is this third faction? And to answer that question, we need to first talk about what Elma is. For this theory, I'm going to jump straight into the evidence and list every piece of information we have that could help us deduce Elma's origins. First, she wants to protect humans, who are the descendants of Samaar. That's one point in favor of her being from Samaar. But she rides the Ares and recognizes the Vita, both of which are made with dark matter, something they have in common with the ghosts. According to the communications device texture, Elma has a phase transition gun, which is based on Samaarian technology. However, she brings dark matter engines to Earth, which are the circular parts of the ghosts. The art book tries to hide this fact by censoring any mention of DM engines. But when you look at the 3D model of the Ares, you can see that the circular parts are labeled as DM base and DM glow. The Lifehold core uses a Trine barrier as protection, which surprises Luxar, because it's a type of technology unique to the Clue system. The only group known to have some relation to Clurians are Samaarians. This is why Clurian DNA is almost identical to human DNA. In fact, even Clurian cats are almost identical to cats on Earth. Elma has an antimatter sustainer in her body, and the ghosts have antimatter cores, which are the parts that exploded when they fell to Earth. There are also some visual similarities. The central pillar of the Rose Garden has crystal parts, which flicker with a blue light, similar to how Elma's hair is described, while the Soma crown looks closer to a ghost construct. There's a lot of evidence in favor of both sides, so I don't think this is actually about Samaar versus ghosts. It's more like pieces of evidence indicating some connection between the two. So then, what is Elma? And who's the third faction behind the war? I think Elma is most likely an artificial life form, created by the original Samaarians, and placed on the Rose Garden to protect humans. The name Elma could be a subtle hint towards this. And I just find it more realistic that the Samaarians wouldn't leave humans completely unsupervised. Her similarities to ghosts could be explained by the likely scenario that the ghosts also originated from Samaarians. We know that the Samaarian homeland is most likely on Mira, and Mira seems to have a lot of dark matter inside of it. One possibility is that the ghosts are Samaarian bioweapons, which turned against their masters. It wouldn't be the first time that happened in the Xeno series. Or they could be a faction of transhumanist Samaarians, who abandoned their humanity to lean further into dark matter technology. Either way, the original Samaarians who formed the Samaar Federation seem to be practically gone and forgotten. A couple lines in the game refer to humans as the legacy of Samaarians, or say that the genetic failsafe of the ganglion lives on inside humanity, as if the Samaarians themselves are no longer present. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are extinct, but they obviously don't hold the same power that they once did. So, I think the third faction I've been talking about are the remnants of the original Samaarians, who were growing desperate in their battle against extinction. Which is why they contacted Elma, to use the Rose Garden as their final secret weapon, and take out the Ghost and Samaar motherships at the cost of sacrificing the Earth, which led to the opening cutscene of the game. At this point, everyone knows that the lone hero is the Black Knight. He loves Japan, he has a katana, his mech has a katana, and he seems to be acquainted with Lao.
Fancy seeing you here.
Now I want to talk about something else, something that's perhaps as obvious as him being the Black Knight, but somehow not noticed by anyone. His origins. The art book shows that he's an alien. He's very dear to Elma, and Nagi has watched him grow up. He's stated to be in his late 20s, so he must have been born after Elma came to Earth. But how could an alien be born on Earth? Considering Elma is the only other alien we know, the lone hero must be her son. And I think I actually know who the father is as well. There's a character in the art book named Father, whose only defining features are being a father and looking rough apparently. The art book doesn't say anything else about him, but we actually know a lot more than it would first seem. In the official short stories for Xenoblade X, there's a character mentioned by Nagi, a person who was close friends with him and a mutual acquaintance of Vandom, a talented engineer who played a crucial role in the success of Project Exodus. But he sadly passed away due to an illness before the aliens even arrived. He is the person who came up with the Blade acronym, and most likely the friend back on Earth Elma speaks of in one of her heart-to-hearts. The friend who loved old cars, would take Elma on rides with him, and enthusiastically explain car parts to her. I think that sounds fitting for an engineer. And maybe his illness was the reason he looked so rough. The lone hero actually kind of resembles him. So I'm almost certain on this one. Elma plus father equals the lone hero. Now let's talk about something I'm less sure about. The question of why the Black Knight is the Black Knight. What's the armor for? If the lone hero is a blue glowing alien like Elma, the obvious answer would be to hide his real body. Aesthetically, it checks out with all the blue parts the Black Knight's armor has. Maybe the Ares crash landed on Mira, which damaged its external armor, as well as the lone hero's mimeosome, which is why he switched back to his real body and also his personal mech. I know I'm jumping ahead quite a bit, but stay with me for now. So, how could he switch back to his real body? Where even is his real body? It wasn't inside the lifehold alongside Elma. And whenever someone mentions the lone hero, Elma gets really upset. Maybe a little too upset, considering they should have been able to revive him using the lifehold. Which makes me think his genetic data wasn't stored on the White Whale. But I don't think he was piloting the Ares in his real body either. Everyone on the White Whale were in their mimiosomes. And Elma was hiding the fact that she's an alien. So it wouldn't make any sense for the lone hero to be walking around in his real alien body. So, if his genetic data or real body weren't on the White Whale, and the Ares was being piloted by his mimiosome, then where is the lone hero? I think the most likely answer to that is New Tokyo. The concept art for Mira shows 2 human cities. And in the game, an NPC mentions receiving radio signals of messages in Japanese and French. In fact, one of these messages were received just before the White Whale crashed. And in the concept art for New Tokyo, we can see an Ares, although it might just be for scaling purposes. Regardless, I believe that by some stroke of luck, the lone hero crash-landed the Ares somewhere near the Japanese Arkship, the Arkship of the country he loved the most, and the Arkship he had chosen to store his real body. The real reason Elma was so upset about losing his mimiosome is because that mimiosome was her only connection to her son. She had no idea what had happened to the Japanese Arkship, and due to his body existing on another Arkship, his genetic data wasn't stored on the White Whale. Only a copy of his consciousness was, in order to pilot the Ares alongside Elma. So when his mimiosome disappeared, Elma had basically lost him. As for how the lone hero managed to repair the Ares, that's because he has a personal battleship named Dreadnought, which has an Ares adjustment chamber inside of it. And since the word adjustment is used rather than maintenance or storage, maybe the Ares is inside the Black Knight's mech. We also don't know how he obtained the Rothian sword and the high-tech external armor for his mech. But considering he must have been on Mira for at least 2 months, it shouldn't be hard to explain. Maybe the external armor is made with Klurian technology, since New Tokyo seems to have a Klurian spaceship floating above it, similar to the Manon ship over New LA. And since Celica somehow managed to end up in New LA, it shouldn't be too unreasonable for some Rothians to find their way into New Tokyo, which would explain the sword. In my first theory, I said the Rose Garden and the Samaar Mothership are 2 separate entities, and I based it on a few things. Mainly the statement that the Rose Garden is slightly different than the one with the Ganglion. If they were referring to the Ganglion flagship, I don't think the difference would need to be pointed out, because it's not a slight difference at all. It's quite obvious. The Rose Garden is also stated to be in orbit above a planet, so the Garden of Eden being above Earth would make sense. As for how the Rose Garden could trigger a phase shift explosion or stay hidden from everyone for so long, that's because Elma has access to technologies that would let her do both of those things, according to the communications device texture. But what if I'm wrong, and the Rose Garden is the Samaar Mothership? Well, I have a backup theory for that as well, and it actually doesn't change all that much. The Rose Garden would still be the Garden of Eden, and Elma would still be the Cherub protecting it. The Samaarians in this case would be Adam and Eve, since they were exiled from the garden and then created life on Earth. Since Elma was created by the Samaarians, she would leave the Rose Garden alongside them. And after the Samaarians created humans, they would task Elma with protecting them, which would symbolically make the Earth the new Garden of Eden. Instead of hiding in the Rose Garden, Elma could be inside the Cherub, floating in orbit, or hiding among humans, like Chaos from Xenosaga. In her mimiosome, of course, which also happens to look like Chaos. The phase shift explosion in this version would be done by Cherub itself, similar to what Ion might have done if it wasn't stopped by Klaus. And there's even another orbital facility where they could store the Cherub. In one of the short stories, Nagi mentions taking a dark matter engine orientation exam in geosynchronous orbit above the planet, so the phase shift explosion could have originated from there. In the end, even if the Rose Garden is the Samaar Mothership, the plan that destroyed the Earth can stay basically the same, as well as Elma's involvement in it. On a sea of dark matter, every minute matters. But what is this sea of dark matter supposed to be? It's not just cool-sounding lyrics made up for the battle team. The comms device also mentions it. And the Dreadnought was built to travel it. Well, I think I may have figured out what it is. In the art book, there is a short story where we learn that miranium dust exists in the air of Mira, and that somehow seems to interrupt the energy transfer between Skells and the dark matter engine, which was the original power source of Skells before landing on Mira. From this, we can infer that miranium can somehow inhibit dark matter. And miranium is present underneath the soil of every continent on Mira, despite the fact that they are all summoned from different worlds. This is obviously not a natural occurrence, and in the concept art of Mira, we can see dark matter in the cracks between the summoned worlds. So here's my theory. All continents on Mira and the water surrounding them exist on a literal sea of dark matter, separated by a protective layer of miranium. But that's not where the theory ends. In a cutscene, Goetia mentions not being able to locate the Samaar motherland on Mira, despite the ganglin's ability to scour the entire surface of the planet in just 3 days. So what if the Samaar motherland lies beneath the surface, under the dark matter sea? I know it can sound like a big assumption to make, but there's already another game in the series where the remains of an ancient civilization were hidden underneath an artificial sea, and accessible only through a giant chasm surrounding an equally massive tower. I'd also like to remind you that plans for Xenoblade 2 began while they were still working on Xenoblade X, so take that as you will. This section of the video is kind of outdated now that we know the identity of the masked woman. But I'm keeping it in anyways, since I feel like it adds credibility to the idea of New Tokyo being on Mira. So, like many others, I speculated that the masked woman was Reina Sakuraba, a character who's on the same page of the art book as Father. But there are a couple pieces of evidence I haven't seen anyone else talk about, so that's what I'm going to do. The masked woman has a blade logo on her outfit that is different from the one we know. But no one outside of New LA should know what blade stands for, unless they know the person who came up with the acronym. And that person is Father. Father is probably Japanese, and he's a genius engineer, so he was most likely working for Sakuraba Industries, the company that is stated to have played a crucial role in the success of Project Exodus. That could explain why Reina Sakuraba knows him. However, in the art book, Reina is actually hinted to not be working for Sakuraba Industries, despite belonging to the family. And since the Hresvelg is made by Grenada, I wouldn't be surprised if she was an engineer working for Grenada, which would explain the Japanese aesthetics of the Hresvelg despite being made by a Spanish company. The Sakuraba residence is in New Tokyo, which could mean Reina, the lone hero, and Liesel are actually from there. And maybe Neil Nail as well, since the armor of the Hresvelg is hinted to be alien technology. Out of all the alien races in Xenoblade X, the Zerobogan by far have the most to say about Samaarians. The picture that usually gets used when talking about Samaar is from a Zerobogan quest, where you find a CD containing a hologram of Golbogga, which is the Zerobogan name for Samaar. But there's actually 2 more pieces of information we get from the Zerobogan that people don't seem to talk about. The first of these is that there used to be many types of Golbogga, and the second is that the Golbogga disappeared on a day called the Day of Regrowth. The latter is easy to explain. The Japanese name for the ganglion is growth, so the day of regrowth would probably refer to when the ganglion rebelled against the Samarians. But what are the many types of Golbogga? It doesn't sound like it's referring to gender or race. They looked different from each other, but the ones who created the Zerbogan looked like humans, which makes it sound like Samarians consisted of multiple races. If Mira was the planet created at the end of Future Redeemed, this could easily be explained as being the races from Xenoblade 1 and 2. But as I said, this isn't going to be a video where I try to argue that. So what else could it be? Samarians arrived at the beginning of the universe, so if humans escape Mira into a new universe with all the other aliens and create the original Samaar Federation of that timeline, that would make all of them Golbogga. Or maybe Golbogga refers to all the alien races that were created before the Zerbogan. It's a more boring answer, but it can still be the correct one. You likely noticed how much Elma resembles Blade from Xenoblade 2. But blades aren't the only thing from that game which shares similarities with Elma. There's also the Guldos, humans who tried becoming immortal by replacing their brains with core crystals. Obviously that didn't go so well, so Klaus repurposed core crystals into blades. But if a core crystal brain implant was successful, I think the result of that would probably look a lot like Elma. And since Elma was supposed to watch over humans for thousands of years, it would make sense for her to be made immortal somehow. The art book also mentions how Elma's hair strands actually extend from a larger base crystal, and the light inside of her hair seems to fade as it moves from the base towards the tips. It also changes its brightness and patterns depending on Elma's emotional state. So the large base crystal most likely releases her brain. There's also a blue crystal inside each DNA tube within the lifehold, so the idea of data being stored inside blue crystals is already in the game. Xenoblade 2 really took some heavy inspiration from Xenoblade X. Why is it that you can't escape Mira even through time travel? Even if you travel 3000 years into the future, you just end up in the same spot. And supposedly, the space around Mira is small. But how could space be small? Does nothing exist outside of Mira? So, this might be the most schizophrenic theory so far. But what if the universe of Mira, or Mira itself, was a zero-dimensional existence? As in, it's literally just a point. Kind of like how Lost Jerusalem in Xenosaga was reduced to Planck scale, although we don't exactly know how that worked either. But if it's true, I think it could be used as a metaphysical explanation for a few mysteries of Mira. If Mira was a point, then everything and everyone on Mira would technically exist as one. So it would make sense for them to telepathically understand each other, since their minds would be connected. And a zero-dimensional existence wouldn't have a real defining left or right, front or back, and future or past. All space and time would be condensed into a single point. Trying to escape it through time travel would be pointless, because there would be no difference between now and 3000 years into the future. There would only be an endless now, so to speak. Mira is also referred to as the land of beginnings and ends, Alpha and Omega. If it exists in the past and the future at the same time, then the only way to escape it could be through one of two exits, the end of time or the beginning of time. It should be obvious which one of those is more preferable. So if traveling within time is useless, the only option left is to travel outside of it. This would also explain how the Samarians arrived at the beginning of the universe, since Mira is supposed to be their homeland. Maybe the humans will escape Mira through the beginning of time and become the new Samarians of the next universe. After all, the game hints at a time loop. Xenoblade 3 has shown us some abstract depictions of a multiverse on a 2D plane, with universes existing in parallel and overlapping each other. And I think I have an idea of what Mira would look like in such a depiction. Normal universes can have their space and time represented as two different axes. But in a zero-dimensional universe, all space and time could only be represented as a single point, which is infinitely small. It's easy to visualize travel between two normal universes. A point in the space-time of one universe would correspond to another such point in another universe, even if they differ in size or time flows differently between them. But while traveling to a zero-dimensional universe, all points in the space-time of a normal universe would correspond to the entirety of the zero-dimensional one. It almost makes sense why you can enter such a universe but not exit it. After all, where would a hypothetical exit even lead you? To a completely random point, or to all points at once, cloning you infinitely? The only plausible escape is to exit time itself and start from the beginning. I realize that when you say all of this out loud, it can sound like crazy talk. But it's not like there isn't any precedent for the things I'm saying here. The Xeno series is already known for eternal recurrences, endless nows, relativity in space-time, and alternate planes or abstract existences. Speaking of which, how and why did Mira end up being condensed into a zero-dimensional existence? In a previous theory, I've mentioned how Mira might be enveloped in a sea of dark matter. And in Xenosaga, Lost Jerusalem had to be reduced to Planck scale due to the occurrence of a matter shift phenomenon, although it had nothing to do with dark matter. It referred to the disappearance of real objects and appearance of gnosis in their place. The ghosts in Xenoblade X are somewhat similar to the gnosis. They both seem to appear out of nowhere, and they are both capable of phasing through physical objects. So, what if Mira went through its own version of a matter shift phenomenon, which created the dark matter sea, and Mira had to be sealed to stop its expansion? Obviously, the details are different between Xenoblade X and Xenosaga, but I think there's a really strong chance that Mira is the Lost Jerusalem of the Xenoblade X universe, which means Xenoblade X might be the first time in the Xeno series that we get to explore Lost Jerusalem in its entirety, which I think is pretty cool, and would make Xenoblade X a pretty unique game, if it wasn't unique enough already. That's it for all of my theories. I hope I was able to convince you on them, and even if not, I hope you at least found them informative or entertaining. I also have some other ideas that didn't quite make it as full theories, which I will show on the screen right now. You can pause the video if you want to read them. If you disagree with any of my theories, or just want some clarification, let me know in the comments. Also feel free to share your own theories. And thank you for watching.